Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. I'm continuing on now with a look at fighting rifle cartridges. Started off with the 5.56 in the first episode. Now we're going to talk about the next most popular cartridge that's chambered in AR platforms here in the United States. The 300 Blackout. If you want to hear my thoughts on the Blackout, stick around. The 300 Blackout, kind of an odd looking little creation. Definitely more than a pistol cartridge, but doesn't really look like a full-fledged rifle cartridge, and that kind of describes its performance pretty accurately. It's based on a 221 Fireball case, which was a creation of Remington for a very odd little single-shot bolt-action pistol they used to make. It is the smallest, shortest case based on the same head diameter as a 5.56 millimeter. And that's why it was chosen for this kind of mission, and I'll talk about the history of it as we go along. The Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturers Institute, known as SAMI, is the U.S. organization that standardizes dimensions, pressure limits, and things like that for all cartridges in this country. And the 300 Black was approved by them, certified by them in 2011. So that makes it one of the newer cartridges out there in that regard. At the risk of offending a company called Advanced Armament Corporation, AAC, they're the folks that got it standardized by SAMI. They're the ones that put the Blackout name on it. And it's my understanding SAMI actually approved it as the 300 BLK, capital letters, so 300 Black, really. At the risk of offending them, if you read up on their website or look into the creation of this case, AAC will make you believe that this was an inspiration just of them. It was their own little brainchild to create this round. And that just ain't so. I'm sorry. The first time I fired a cartridge that looks like this was in a rifle owned by my friend Jeff Hoffman at Black Hills Ammunition. It was in the mid-1990s. And he had an upper mounted on an M16 lower. And the cartridge name at the time was the 300 Whisper. Now, Whisper was created by a guy named J.D. Jones. He owns SSK Industries, and he's a kind of an innovator in a lot of different cartridges. Started out working with single-shot pistols like the Contender or XP100. And then he put together a whole line of cartridges that he called Whispers. And the idea behind them was to be able to function through an AR platform carbine to throw a very, very heavy 4 caliber bullet at a very low velocity, below the supersonic level. And that's why he gave them the name Whisper. Over the years, there have been subsonic loads made for, like the 7.62 NATO. But putting a tiny little powder charge in a full-size rifle case gives you very erratic performance. And I know a couple of companies that have made them on limited runs for the military, but they just didn't have very good luck with them. What you need is a small case capacity to launch this bullet at a very low velocity. The Whisper that I fired used a 220 grain Sierra Match King bullet, 30 caliber, and it fired it at about 1,050 feet per second. Below 1,100 feet per second is where most manufacturers shoot for a subsonic load. And the reason behind this is if you put a suppressor or a silence on the end of a gun barrel, you can silence most of the boom of the powder charge and the kind of uncorking of the barrel at very high pressures. But if the bullet is supersonic, you still have a crack sound. And if you've ever been downrange, if you've worked the pits at a long-range rifle shoot or something like that, if you've heard that crack of that bullet coming over your head, it's startling. It's a very vicious sound. And that supersonic crack travels with the bullet, so it's going downrange until the bullet goes below the supersonic level. But if you start a bullet below the supersonic level, you don't have that crack. And the less powder you burn, the less boom effect the silencer has to wipe out. So some of the most incredibly quiet full automatic weapons are things like the MP5 SD, which had an integral silencer on it. And it also had a ported barrel that would bring the velocity level of a 115 or a 124 grain bullet down below supersonic. And did even better with 147 grain bullets, which were subsonic to begin with in the 9mm. So when you're just burning a few grains of pistol powder in that cartridge case and you're launching this 220 grain bullet a little over 1,000 feet per second, it truly is a whisper cartridge. That AR-15 M16 that we were firing in, the guy's backyard, the action working, the sounds of the mechanics of the rifle were as loud as that little sound that was coming out the end of the barrel. It really wasn't a whole lot louder than a pellet gun. It was pretty amazing. If they're still suppressed but they're supersonic, that crack sound is kind of hard to pick out direction. So it's not that much of a tactical problem unless you fire several rounds, because if you're downrange and you're getting that crack coming into your location, after 2 or 3 rounds you can kind of narrow it down and decide where that fire is coming from. But if you've got the crack thump, the supersonic followed by the boom of a full volume rifle, you can pick that out very easily. So as I said, I had fired the 300 Whisper 15, 16 years or more before AAC got it standardized by SAMI. And they made a couple of tiny little insignificant dimensional changes to the cartridge case to get it standardized. And the problem was that J.D. Jones had gotten a trademark on the name Whisper, 300 Whisper in all of his cartridges. He had also submitted them for approval by the European equivalent of our SAMI that is called CIP. Now, I'm not sure why he didn't get SAMI approval for it. AAC, as I said, made almost unmeasurable differences in the drawing of the case dimensions, got it approved by SAMI, and as far as I'm concerned, the only reason they did that is so they didn't have to pay royalties to J.D. Jones. Now, I'm 100% sure that AAC will say I'm full of crap and that they had other legitimate reasons for doing that. I don't think they did. I think it was just basically to steal a guy's great idea without giving him any credit or any money. And I can tell you that there are a couple of ammunition companies out there I know of that agree with me, because they make 300 Black. They often co-label it as 300 Black, 300 Whisper, and they pay a royalty to J.D. Jones because they think that's just the right way to do things. And those ammunition companies have my respect. Okay, let's set aside any pissing contest over the naming and the royalties and things like that. What is the 300 Black? Where does it fit into the lineup of rifle cartridges? Ballistically, this thing is rather close to a more common round around the world, known by the 7.62 by 39. The 300 Black is a little bit less powerful. It has a little bit less powder capacity, is the primary cause for that. But it's very close in terms of performance. Several of the rifle cartridges I'm going to discuss, actually most of the rifle cartridges I'm going to discuss in this series of fighting rifle cartridges, are all about 30 caliber. They're all about 7.62. The blackout is just a little bit less powerful than the 7.62 by 39, and both of them are a little bit less powerful than another rather common rifle cartridge, the 30-30 Winchester, or as one of my old hunting buddies calls it, the Dirty Dirty. So we'll set that aside for now. That's going to be one of our fighting cartridges we talk about further on. So this can be loaded at subsonic with very heavy bullets. It can be loaded supersonic with lighter weight bullets. So if you put in a 123 grain bullet or 125 grain bullet, which is similar to the 7.62 by 39, you can get very similar velocities out of similar barrel lengths. So where does that put it? It's more than a 30 carbine, obviously. That's another one of the cartridges I'm going to discuss. It's kind of the American equivalent of the 7.62 by 39. It's a pretty good round. I would say it's okay for medium-sized game up to the size of a white-tailed deer. out to 150 yards, maybe 200 yards with a very carefully chosen bullet that's really designed to operate at those kind of velocities. And if it's good for a white-tailed deer, it's good for a man-sized target as well. So I would say it falls into the 150-yard cartridge range effectiveness. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because several of the ones we're going to talk about are really most effective within about 150 yards. And if you think about home defense, self-defense with a carbine as opposed to a handgun, 150 yards is more than enough for most situations. Now, if you are a country person, if you're a farmer, rancher, you live out in the boondocks like that, you probably want more power, you probably want more reach. But the 300 Black will do most of what we want done operating at that supersonic level. And that supersonic level can go up to, I'll say probably 150 grain bullets or so, but it really works well with 125 grain projectiles, soft points, plastic points, something that's made to expand at that kind of velocity. So to really get a fair comparison of power, I went to the Hodgdon powder reloading site. And I estimated one of the better loads for each caliber, and I adjusted the approximate velocity for the same barrel length so that I could get them all in a 16-inch barrel. And I added another cartridge that I think compares into this and will enter into our discussion of fighting rifle cartridges, and that's the 30 US carbine. So for that reason, I judged them all based on the 110 grain bullet of the 30 carbine. So if you use a 110 grain bullet across all of them and look for good loads and estimate what it would be in a 16-inch barrel, the blackout with 110 would get about 2,300 feet per second. This 110 is about 2,000 feet per second, so it's substantially more than a 30 carbine. 7.62 by 39 gets another little jump. It's going to go to about 2,450, so about 150 feet per second more out of the 7.62 by 39. And then another 100 feet per second, or about 2550, maybe better if you really tuned your loads, out of the 30-30. So throwing that same bullet, we can go from around 2,000 feet per second with the 30 carbine up to 2550 out of the 30-30. That's a 500 feet per second spread, more or less. And all of those are, each one's going to be a little bit better than the other. But I think the difference between the ends, the 30 carbine and the 30-30, might be less than you would imagine. So they can all be pretty good performers. So, I can tell you that some law enforcement agencies have switched their SWAT teams over from 5.56 carbines to the 300 Black. And of the ones I've talked to, the reason they did it primarily was sound suppression. The entry teams that are going in, if they're going to unloose a few 5.56 rounds inside of a building, it is deafening. Some of the teams go in with ear protection on, some don't. But that sound and that blast effect of a 5.56 in a confined room are just awesome. So by using the 300 Black with a suppressor, and with most of them, they're also using the subsonic loads for the maximum quiet effect. They have really as much or more power than a 5.56 in a very quiet package. And there are several companies that make those heavy 190 to 240 grain bullets, and they are customized to give good terminal performance at those kind of velocities. So there are some subsonic loads out there that are really dynamite. And I'll tell you, I don't own a 300 Black. I didn't have any ammo laying around. I called a buddy of mine, and he had just built one up, but hasn't really even started to work with it yet. So he brought me a couple rounds, and this is from a company called G2 Research, which I've never even heard of. And he has, one is subsonic and one is supersonic, so very different bullet weights. And if you can see it in the details, I'll try to give you a close-up. This is kind of a pre-fragmented bullet, and Lehigh Defense does some bullets like this as well. I don't think these are Lehighs, but they have laser cuts in them so that when this thing hits tissue, it's almost immediately going to break into several large fragments, and you know, I have no idea how well it's going to penetrate and the effect that it's going to give. So I can't vouch for these. I don't know anything about them. But that was the only example of a 300 Black I could come up with locally. So most of the SWAT teams that have gone to them are looking both for good terminal effect. You're throwing a 30 caliber bullet. You're throwing 190 or more grains of lead. And if it does expand or fragment effectively at that velocity, you got a pretty solid thump. And it can also be one of the quietest weapon cartridge combinations you can come up with. So the 300 Blackout or the 300 Whisper, which they are interchangeable. Most reloading die sets are marked for both. Everybody that I know of says they are completely interchangeable, both pressure-wise and dimension-wise. I said as a hunting round, it's probably going to be good out to 150 yards or so. Maybe 200 if you're really stretching things and you've really fine-tuned the terminal performance of your bullet. So as a hunting cartridge, it doesn't have anything that others don't have. One unique thing about the Whisper, when I first knew about it in the mid-90s, and I ended up doing an article for Guns and Ammo, shooting it out of a Thompson Contender pistol barrel, Illinois at the time had allowed pistol cartridges. But of course, in their communist way of doing things here, it had to be either a single shot pistol or a revolver. You could not fire, 10 millimeter was legal to use, but only out of a revolver or a single shot. You couldn't use it from semi-auto because those things are terrible, of course. And the one unique kind of cartridge they had spec'd out was the specification said it had to be at least 30 caliber. The cartridge case length could not be longer than 1.4 inches. And talking with one of the game wardens, I think the reason they came up with those specs was to eliminate the 30 Harriet, which was a pistol cartridge for the Contender that was based on a shortened 30-30, and it was a pretty effective pistol cartridge round. They didn't want that to be able to use. It had a longer case, so they came up with minimum 30, 1.4 inches. And the 300 Whisper, as it was originally designed, of course, is 30 caliber, and the cartridge case length was 1.4 inches. So it is exactly meeting those Illinois specifications. Now, we are a little over a year into new laws now, like most of the Midwestern states that were limited to shotgun slugs for deer hunting, or muzzleloaders, after everybody else decided to allow what they call straight case rifle cartridges. 44 Magnum, even the 4570. Some states, the 4570 is too long, so there's some variety in there. But they also said anything legal in a handgun in Illinois would also be legal for a rifle. So they specifically list the 300 Whisper 300 Blackout as a legal deer hunting cartridge in Illinois. And you can fire it out of an AR. But being Illinois, they had to go one step further. Those rifle cartridges can only be used from a single-shot rifle. Now, luckily, the enforcement arm of our DNR here has a little bit more sense. So they decided that if you want to fire this from an AR platform, but you don't have a magazine with you, it's a single-shot rifle. If I want to take the magazine spring and follower out of a lever-action 44 Magnum rifle so I can only load one and no more, they'll count that as a single-shot rifle. So we have ways around some of their goofy ideas. So personally, I think the only real top-notch use for this was as it was originally designed. Heavy bullets, subsonic velocities, used with a sound suppressor. As entry weapons for SWAT teams, as home defense for any kind of honest citizen, I think that's where this kind of cartridge really shines. With supersonic loads, you can use it for hunting, you can use it for self-defense out to a little bit longer distance, but this was uniquely designed for a little bit of a niche of super quiet, but still hard-hitting round to be fired from an AR. That's where I think it fits. If you disagree, of course, you always have the comments available to say what you like. The 300 Black is very popular, and it's really neat and fun to shoot, and I think it's a pretty good round. I just don't think I would use it for anything beyond its original intent of that super quiet, hard-hitting AR cartridge. What am I going to talk about next? I'm going to talk about the other primary military cartridge. 5.56 is still the number one military cartridge for carbines. The 6.8 by 51 is coming online for at least for infantry and war fighters. Not sure where that will end up because there's a lot of controversy around it. But the other primary military cartridge that they make in the millions, maybe billions almost every year, is the 7.62 by 51, the 7.62 NATO. It's still used in rifles by the military. It's used by hunters and home defenders like crazy. And the reason they make most of them is it is still the primary general purpose machine gun round, as well as what's used in the M134 minigun. So the next one up, 7.62 NATO. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you folks tuning in. If you like what I'm doing here, give me a thumbs up, a subscription, and leave a comment whether you agree or disagree. Thank you, folks. Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.